All right, good morning, everyone. This is our weekly Wednesday webinar. Say that 3 times fast. Today we're going to go over just the implementation at the state level, what's going on with the interagency teams, other information. Lisa Jones will be presenting that. Once she's done and all questions are asked and answered on that topic, we will provide a little bit of update on IWDS and a couple policy issues. As usual, please be mindful of your phones. If you have background noise or typing, please mute yourself. And we will have an open session to request questions or comments, or you can always type them into the chat pod. Lisa, go ahead.
Well, good morning, everyone. We thought since we're a month into WIOA implementation, it might be a good time just to let everyone know what we've been doing and what is still left to do, because there's still a lot left to do, but I think we've come a long way. So, Mark, you want to switch? I thought I would start by talking about the key principles, because really all of the work that we're doing is focused around these key principles, and these are the WIOA key principles, which is the Unified Strategic Planning, which we've all been talking about, the enhanced roles of the board. The common measures, of course, is a big deal, and the promoting and the engagement of employers in a stronger way. So with that said, then, what we've done is formed a few key activities around the key principles. The first one we've done is the WIA Implementation Task Force, and that is the state-level board members. Then we have an interagency team that's made up of the core and required OneStop Partners. We have done and are going to do some regional planning sessions. We have task advisory groups, and then we have a portal that you can all access and get information on what's going on with the tags and other WIOA implementation activities. And then, of course, we have the Wednesday webinars. Mark, you want to switch the slide? Now, a little bit more specific on what the functions of each of these things are doing. Of course, the IWDB, that's kind of hard to say instead of IWIB, it's been focusing, of course, on our state-level decisions. We have, for those of you that may not know, there's actually a state law that authorizes the Illinois Workforce Development Board, and it pretty much just mirrors the federal law, but there are some additional things in there, such as there's some benchmarks in there that they want to look at from the workforce perspective statewide. So we are identifying the changes that need to happen in that law. We also have to update the bylaws, and those of you that are on boards or involved in boards at the local level are also doing the same thing. They are hearing our recommendations on state-level policy, such as the designations that the policy on designations that we just sent out, the eligible training provider transition policy that we just sent out, and each of the membership of the IWD task force is the 4 core programs, of course, and then we have a business member assigned to the tags, which I'm going to talk about in a little bit, and then we have the required program partner interagency team focuses on the details of it. And then these folks act as a liaison between the tags and the interagency team. Mark, you want to switch the slide? Our interagency team, of course, is focusing, it also has state-level decision and actions. Unified planning is a big one. We're looking at the regional designation. I think many of you probably already know that for right now, we've currently adopted the 10 economic development regions. We did have some new data updated on the regional designations. We're not ready to release that yet. We're still analyzing it. But in the future, we'll be talking about the data that has changed since we did this 10 or 12 years ago. Service integration is another area that we're working very hard on the interagency team with, and career services, to make sure that all of the OneStop partners that are in the actual centers have the same or common definitions for career services so that we can really leverage our resources and work together. Not really going to talk about infrastructure funding, maybe just a minute, because that's, going to be a struggle, I think, for all of us to come together and really figure out what that means. And then, of course, one-stop operations, the MOU and common performance is also some of the big things that we're going to be discussing through that interagency team. And again, it's the 4 core programs, and then we also have a representative from all the OneStop partners, which we'll go over those in a minute. Mark, you want to? Then here we have our tags, and each of the tags is pretty much based on sort of the state level decisions that we're making, or we centered them around specific activities that not only follow the law but also follow the types of activities that we're addressing at the state level. We have the one on area designation and board structure, state plan, the policy tag, the operations tag, youth, performance, and technology. And the performance and technology, I think performance has met once, technology has not met yet, but that should be coming up. But all the other tags have at least met once or twice, and you can find those summaries of what occurred in those meetings on the WIOA portal. And you can also see just on the slide a couple of the key things that they're talking about in each of those tags. Mark? How recently were those newsletters sent out from DCEO? Oh, new letters. Levon, if you're asking about the policies, those have gone out like over the last month and a half.
They're all available on the policy, DCO policy page on Illinois WorkNet, where all of our policies for WIA have been housed, and you'll be able to identify them as transitional policies. They'll be the top 5 or 6 on the list, so you'll be able to identify those fairly easily, Levon.
Yeah, and we did have we had talked about doing 6 transitional policies to get us up and going for July 1, but we really ended up with just 5 because the board staffing one, and just so you know, it was area designation, the eligible training provider list, the CEO agreement and designation, board membership, and board certification were the 5. The board staffing one we haven't released yet. We're still doing some work on that one. And then I'm kind of jumping ahead, but this is related to the tags. The tags have also, and many of you on the call as well, have reviewed our eligibility policy that will be coming out shortly and the training programs policy. Don't have a specific date yet, but I would say, in the next couple of weeks. So the foundational core programs, just for those of you that may not know, or just as a refresher for the rest of us, WIOA required 4 core programs, and those, of course, are us, Title 1B, which in the legislation we're actually under a chapter called Workforce Development Activities. Title 2 is housed in IDES. No, sorry. Title II is housed in at the Illinois Community College Board and is adult ed. Title III is the Wagner-Pizer Employment Services, and IDES oversees that program. And then Title IV, the last foundational program, is the vocational rehabilitation that DHS oversees. So, Mark. Then these are the OneStop partners, and I don't know if it's hard for you guys to see this, but it's kind of hard for us to see, but there's basically 16 required partners. One is the senior community employment program that's in aging, the trade program, which is here, CSBG, which is Community Services Block Grant, that is also housed in DCEO. TANF is a required OneStop partner, unless the governor would designate it or say that it doesn't have to be, but in Illinois it will be a required partner. Job Corps is also a required partner, and I think if you can read the PowerPoint, you can see what the other ones are, Mark. So let's get in a little bit, just kind of an update of what we're doing and what the key areas we're focusing on in, at the state board level, the interagency team, and the tags. So first, it's the unified planning. I think Mark wants me to hurry up.
I don't know why I'm doing that.
The unified planning, Illinois is going to do a unified plan. There is an option to do a combined plan, which would include programs, one-stop programs beyond the 4 core, but at this time, we are just going to focus on the 4 core programs, but we will be discussing how some of the other one-stop required partner programs fit into the state plan. So we're working on, what's our state strategy, getting that aligned, how that aligns and will influence local services and regional market needs. And then I think the most important point, and that DOL has really continued to stress to us, is the integration of services and the coordination of resources. Mark, you want to? Again, the focus on regional collaboration and planning. As I said earlier, we did adopt the 10 economic development regions. The local areas are pretty well lined up to those regions. We've got a couple that we're going to have to discuss with which is the better economic development region for them to align with right now. These are the partners that they are required to include in their regional planning pieces. And one of the things, if you go to the next slide, Mark, we've already done as far as regional planning. Back in the early late spring, we collaborated or partnered with the Illinois Community College Board to do regional focus groups with the community colleges. Those sessions were specifically to identify and inform the community college's strategic plan, and they're required to do a strategic plan every 5 years. And Levon, if I said that wrong, type in and tell me the right answer. And I think those had a really good turnout. We had the local workforce areas involvement, we had business involvement, and then of course the community colleges. And those focus groups were centered around the 10 economic development regions. The second thing that we've done, and this is, back to the regional planning and the focus groups with the community college boards, we really are looking at how we can strengthen our alignment between workforce and education, and with a focus on career pathways. The next thing that we did, and you can move or not move, it's fine. The next thing we've done is we had some sector strategy training sessions. We had 3 of those across the state. And that really started working towards how do we engage employers, what does it really mean to do sector strategies, and what that's going to culminate into is a larger regional planning summit, for the lack of a better word, that will occur in October. So in between now and October, we are going to be doing a state-level policy academy to ensure our state strategy and the vision that we see is, that the administration sees aligns with the work that we need to do, making sure that we're all sort of on the same page. Then in September right now, tentatively, we're going to do a second 1.5-day, maybe 2-day meeting with the OneStop Partners to bring them together to kind of, start to discuss what are the resources that are available in the local area, how do those resources support and how those resources support employers. So there will be some employers at that meeting as well, but it would be at the end of the meeting. And then, of course, the October summit that I've already discussed. So we really are looking at, what is really needed and, what is really needed for our regional plans. And then, so hopefully by the end of October, we'll all have a good idea of what our, what not only the state level vision is, but what your visions are going to be at the regional and local levels. Okay, Mark. The MOU, that of course is something that the interagency team is tackling, and all, of course, local areas have to have an MOU. The one new thing for those of you that may not be aware is that the MOUs are now going to be reviewed every 3 years. I think, from a local area perspective, they're celebrating because we used to require those every year. And then Mark, you want to move to the next slide? OneStop infrastructure funding, like I said, I'm really not going to talk about that. That's something that needs a lot of discussions within the interagency team. And Laura just said, I'm sorry. And the first meeting on that is on Monday. We'll start those discussions. The service integration and one-stop centers. And one of the things around the one-stop centers that we've been doing at the state level is getting a good handle on where not only the comprehensive one-stop centers are, but also the Department of Employment Security offices, because there is a requirement in WIOA that the employment services offices be located in the one-stop center, and they can no longer be standalone offices. So we'll be making some recommendations, not necessarily, don't misunderstand me, to move comprehensive centers, but it'll be more tied to what the certification requirements are, because one-stop centers are now required to be certified to receive infrastructure funding. And so that is what we're doing at the interagency team level. And Mark, you want to move on? Thanks. Career services, that is a matrix, and I think many of you have gotten the matrix, and we can also post that matrix on the portal. And each of the OneStop partners, we based this matrix on the 16, how many is it, Neely? Career services, the major ones, 16? 13 career services, the major areas of those career services, and then asked each of the OneStop partners to tell us, one, do they deliver that service? If they do deliver that service, how is that service delivered? And then three, when they're providing it in the OneStop, would that be via technology, or would they have a staff person on site? And again, we'll get that posted on the portal so you folks can see that. I know we did share that with our Illinois Workforce Partnership, so they do have it as well. Mark, thank you. And then the final thing, of course, is the Common Performance Accountability. That, again, is something that we're really looking closely at. We do have a tag assigned to that. There's also, under the interagency team, a small subset of members that are looking at it from that perspective, too. And then for those of you that would be interested, the Federal Register released yesterday the proposed guidelines for performance, along with 5 templates that they're looking at to support the common performance measures. Mark? Oh, Levon, what's your question? No. Levon Nelson is asking if the October Summit and the State Level Policy Academy are the same, and no, they are not. The State Level Policy Academy will be the directors and key staff in the governor's office and key staff within each of the partner areas. And then the summit in October will be focused on the economic development regions and the local workforce areas, businesses, and partners that are required for the regional planning. Then finally, just quick, we do have our WIOA portal, and you can get on there to find additional information about the summaries. We do need to update that, so I'm going to be working with Jeannie to get that updated and make sure it has the most current information. And then we're doing the Wednesday webinars. So that's really, I knew this wasn't going to be a whole 2 hours today, but we did feel it was important to kind of let you guys know what was going on and, the direction that we're heading. So I'm happy to take any questions about any of this.
As we're waiting for those questions, don't run off. We are going to do a little bit of update on IWDS and some policy issues, so stick around if you've got some concerns with those areas.
Okay. We're getting our first question.
And the phone lines are open too, so
yeah.
Pam or Levon, if you want to make comments or questions via the telephone, please do.
Well, while Pam's typing, this is Jim Potts. I'll pass on a few things about IWDS. Last Friday, there were some deployment changes to production. We were having some issues with the guided application for a youth client where the tests couldn't be added because the education screen had to be completed first, and that's been fixed. So you should notice that on the guided app. There's also a new printed application that was put in IWDS last Friday. Some of the folks had questions because in the last two pages, page 10 of 11 and page 11 of 11, there's two separate signature sections for the career planner. And that was, I believe, put on because if you remember back when the paper application was taken, maybe a client would get the application emailed to them or email it back. Well, then the career planner would look over the application, verify everything looked good on page, and so they would sign on page 10 of 11. Then the next page, that's where the customer has their information specifying that all the information is true and accurate, and they would sign. And then there's a section below that that states for official staff use only, and that's for the career planner's signature again. If you don't have both of those signed, but as long as they're signed, the first one signed before, I'm sure the monitors aren't going to wring you up by the toes. This is just a safety net in case that somebody emailed their app or it was done online. The big thing is the career planner has to have a signature stating that this is true and accurate, and it needs to be dated on or prior to whatever the certification date. And the same thing for the client's application. It needs to be signed and dated on a date on or prior to the certification, meaning you would never have an application that's signed after they had been certified. So those are some of the questions that came out from those deployments. And also, one other change that came out on the application definition page, it used to display a full Social Security number of a client. That's been removed. That's part of that P2, Protection of Personal Information. Also, our programmers right now are swamped because the governor's directed that all of the code within IWDS have all of the Social Security numbers encrypted. So they're really buried right now making sure that happens. And then we also had some issues come up with IWDS that youth out of school who had barriers that required low income, which those would have been youth needing assistance, or individuals who had graduated high school or equivalent that were basic skills deficient, the system wasn't giving the drop downs for the documentation. So the programmers found time to make those changes, and those are going to be deployed today around 1 o'clock time frame. So that's the biggest updates for IWDS.
Okay, and one thing to follow up on what Jim said, I know we have some monitors on here, but we will also make sure that we coordinate closely with the monitoring team so that they understand the issue about just needing the one signature. And then Pam was asking on terms of the core partners for the local workforce development boards, should they be working directly with the locals? We have discussed that on the, at the interagency team level, and we'll be sending out a communication to the staff and working with the interagency team partners at the state level to assign folks, particularly where IDES and Voc Rehab are concerned in TANF because those are state employees. And then related to that, we're also going to be doing communication on a regular basis on the activities of the interagency team that will go out to the local areas and, and to the staff of the partner agencies so that they're also aware of what is going on. We have another question. The new app only asks for one additional contact. Is that all that's required?
Per the law, the requirement for additional contacts is really, it's not in the law, it's more your local policies. So whatever you guys want, just because there's only one on the app, some areas have up to 5, most have 2, so it's not restricted by just because there was one on there. I think for family it only has one person too, but that wouldn't be relevant if there's more than one family member. You would want to list them all. So
IWDS allows for multiple, right?
So IWDS allows for any additional contacts you want. It'll pick 100 of them. One other thing about those IWDS modifications, some folks forwarded up and they were correct when the change went in, they weren't able to delete some 1Y services, and that was causing some problem. That was fixed as of the 1Y being the youth. It wouldn't let people delete some old youth services. So that's fixed, and they can now delete the youth services. And another issue that came up for some ITA characteristic screens, there were some issues that Dan White at Rockford had brought up, and those are going to be fixed. But you'd know if you came across that issue. So if you haven't dealt with it, you'd know it's not relevant for yours.
We have a question about the CEO meeting that will be happening to approve their board, and the question is, will we know who the state level partners are by then? Our next interagency team meeting isn't until August 17th, so unfortunately, I would say we won't know. But also, because these are but since these are the state level or required partners, not all of them are necessarily appointed. So I think we'll be okay there. And Laura just reminded me that those are due the 14th. So if you need an extension on that, please contact us and it'll be fine. Okay.
Going further with board certification, we've had some questions on the appointment/reappointment form, how you complete the business representative section. We're going to be sending some more clarification on that. Laura sent some kind of Q&A on Monday regarding the questions she's been receiving. One of those, we did a little more research and found that the number of employees, what WIOA is looking for, is different than what we needed to look for under WIA. So we're going to either send out a document, an email, or post an attachment to that policy onto the policies page here in the next couple days. But in basic, what they're looking for in number of employees is your entire business or corporation that is under the same ownership. So for example, a Walgreens, to my knowledge, does not franchise. So every employee, if you have a representative from Walgreens on your board, being appointed or reappointed, you would want to get, as best to their knowledge, number of employees of that company. A McDonald's, on the other hand, has franchisees. So there are corporate McDonald's, they would have a number of employees under that ownership, and then a franchisee, say here in Springfield, we have one that owns about 5 locations, maybe each location has 50 employees, then you would put down 250 for that employee representative or business representative. So that's how you look at it. There'll be a lot more information on that document that we send out to where you can go to find information from the Small Business Administration. It's kind of odd in that the small business definition is a federal definition utilized for many different things. One of the main ones is a funding issue, and some funds are only available to small businesses. So we can see where they're looking at trying to provide funds only to those really small businesses. Unfortunately for us at the WIOA level, we're utilizing it to determine how many employment opportunities there are in a given local area. And so their definition doesn't really match as well as what we need, but that's what we utilize based on the federal guidelines. And so you'll see those where you can define those. They utilize the current tax forms as to define what an employee or a worker is. Volunteers are not considered an employee. However, some contracted people could be considered. Temp employees could be considered. So you have to kind of look at it, and like I say, the guidance we'll provide will give a little bit of direction, send you to some websites and some of the federal guidelines that dictates all this, so you'll be able to properly identify that. Also, the average annual receipts is more defined in this document, and that's the average over the last 3 years. Unless you're less than 3 years in business, then it's the average of however long. And all these numbers and both employees and receipts are done on a monthly basis. Then you figure out what the average is based on every month combined over those 3 years. It's kind of, like I say, for our purposes, it's kind of ridiculous, but that's what the law says we go by, and so that's what we're going to do. and hopefully this guidance will provide a better understanding. One thing to know and recall is that the average annual receipts really is only needed if you're determining that a business representative is going to be identified as a small business. So if you've got, you're required to have at least 2 representatives of small business on your board. If you've got your 2 and you don't want to search for any more and deal with trying to get those average receipt calculations, then that's up to you. Where you'll find the problem is down the road when one of those board members decides to leave the board or their term expires and you have to replace a small business. You know, if you at least had a couple extras identified as small business, you know you have adequate coverage on that portion of the requirements of WIOA. Let's see. Okay, for a Walmart by store, no. It's again, you're going to go to who is the ownership of that entity. And so for Walmart, I don't think they franchise. I think Walmart owns all of their facilities. And so it would be not only a national, but they also require worldwide numbers. So if you have a company with facilities overseas under the same ownership, those employees and receipts should be included. And you know what, there's a little bit more I could provide, but there'll be a lot of more clarification in this document that we send out. But that's just kind of the sense of what we're dealing with in getting these numbers. If you've already completed a form and sent it in, or you're in the process of completing one and have a signature, don't bother with going back and changing these things unless you're trying to identify someone as small business. We have to be accurate in identifying that. And for small business, all we're asking for is a checkbox on that form that says you've verified or the appointee has verified that they meet the requirements as a small business. What about placeholder idea for?
Yes.
I wanted to... Hey, Mark, this is Ann. I have a follow-up question on that Walmart comment you said. You know, the board members are appointed, the business reps, because they have optimum decision-making authority for their store for wherever they are. The individuals that are on the board don't have authority to, or any over, they don't have any supervision over any other Walmarts that are in another state or overseas or whatever. So I guess
It's a little conflicting, you're right.
There's a conflict there on what you're saying.
It definitely seems conflicting in what the purpose of a individual is on the board compared to the fact that they should have speaking ability for their entire business. And when you're talking about something with hundreds and thousands of locations worldwide, agreed. I don't know how best to answer that. As far as putting these numbers down, really it really only matters as when you're identifying a small business, to be honest. Right. Other than the number of employees, what we want is an accurate reflection so that we can get a sense of how large the coverage and employment opportunities are for that entity. And so while unless we were to ask for 2 numbers, what's the number in your local area, which is what we asked for before, and what's your number for your entire business entity? I don't know if you guys want to make comment to say that you'd like to put down both numbers, but we at least need that other number for the other purpose.
Okay, Pat, I had provided that information based on the information we had under WIA, but Mark did some more research about the small business, and that's where this came up, so that's why it's changed. As far as the placeholder is concerned, that would be great, and then I could go ahead and get started on reviewing all of the other appointments and just waiting on the 2, so that way we can get going and make sure that the boards are certified by October 1 as required. So that would be fantastic. Just send me what you have and except for those 2, and then I could get started on it if you're ready to go on those.
Right, and yes, that's correct, Gary. TANF is not a required member of the board. It is just a required job center partner. So just to clarify that, and I'm sorry if I said that in a way that made it sound like if they were.
As I'm thinking about the employees, I think what we can discuss here at DCO is utilizing that form for local employees. However, again, keeping in mind, if you're going to identify someone as a small business, you have to utilize the entire entity number, not local. So I don't want people to get confused when they put down a local number, and that cannot be used for determining small business. So, if we put 2 boxes there, one for local and one for entire entity, or just use that box for local only. But again, going back to the checkbox, if I check it as a small business, I've verified that either I've met the requirements because of annual average receipts or number of employees. And it's one or the other. It's never both. You have to go to the guide, the table, to determine which one of those numbers in your industry they're looking for.
And I just want to be clear that this is small business. This isn't just anybody. That's when you want to identify the small business. So this seems very confusing to me. And so I just want to be clear that this is not for every business member on your board. It's just in the instance where you want to use them as your small business representative.
Okay, and then the other thing is that we want to update on that form is the career clusters. I'm providing some guidance where you can go to find a crosswalk between ONET codes, SOC codes, and the career clusters. That'll be sent out with this document. The changes that we are going to change from requiring one career cluster to requiring as many as necessary to properly reflect the employment opportunities of that entity. So that if you have a manufacturing company, you have sales, you have distribution, you should identify all 3 of those career clusters so that we have a pure indication of what your local area industry sectors are and what that business entity is reflecting. So, we're going to change that on the form to require more than one. So require as many as are necessary for that. Because the question that's come to me is, well, I've got, a vice president of a company. How do I identify them in a career cluster? Well, we're really looking for the entity, not the individual on the board as far as what their career cluster is. Because career clusters are based on occupations. They're not based on types of business or industry. So that'll be another clarification that'll come out with this document. Any other questions on the board form, since we're needing those by next week or Monday the week after, whatever the 14th falls on? If not, as Lisa said, we're trying to finalize some policies that hopefully will come out in the next couple of weeks. No, and Pat is asking if she needs to use the new one. No, as I mentioned earlier, if you've got a form, the version you have in hand now already completed, especially if they're signed, do not go back and change those. We'll accept those with the understanding that we're making changes at this point or whenever point we send out clarification. We know it's difficult to get those signatures and you've already got those in hand or in the mail. We don't want you to go back and redo it. The only place where I would say that might be an issue is if you've calculated small business incorrectly and are identifying that appointee as a small business incorrectly. Because of that, then we might have an issue. If you've got more than 2 small business entities, it shouldn't be an issue. But if you're sitting on that line of 2 small business entity representatives and one of them is incorrectly calculated it, you might have to go back and determine for sure that they do meet that definition, or you might need to find someone else, because that could be an audit finding from the national level more than it is from the local level or the state level. But one of the sets of policies we hope to have out in the next week or 2 are the eligibility ones. And if we have the source documentation document table finalized before those go out, we'll try to share that with everybody first, because I know people are asking what sources have we added to the list from before, which ones have we removed based on new information and requirements of WIOA. So we'll get that out to you as soon as we can get it done, but I think they might come out at the same time. And finally, one thing I wanted to mention is that we talk about some of the other partner programs, and trade is one of those. It's not really a partner program, but it's another program. We've talked in past webinars about the coordination of services and ensuring, especially with co-enrollment, that we're taking into account the trade customers and the WIOA requirements at the same time. New trade came out. It kicks in about a month. They are feverishly working on putting together a new policy on trade to adapt to the newest version, which was an old version, which is about the 5th version being undergoing. So we're trying to, the trade staff is doing a great job of trying to clarify between each of those programs for all of you, so they'll make it easy. They'll also be presenting some trade training, whether it be in webinar format or visiting facilities or doing group settings. So I want to make sure everyone's aware that you'll be getting some new stuff from trade whenever we can get that finalized as well.
And we have some of our staff here, if any of them have additional updates they'd like to give you folks, and I appreciate those of you that aren't necessarily in the day-to-day grind of the OneStop or the local areas participating and listening to our updates. I don't know, anybody else have anything, any questions, or? We have
Hey, Lisa, Mike, I'd like to give everyone a reminder that if you're not working on either strengthening or solidifying or creating new employer relationships, please try to have all of your staff work that in as best they can, because that's going to become more and more vital as part of the planning process and then as far as doing work-based learning under WIOA. So try to build that into the daily routine as much as you can.
And Neely just mentioned it's also going to be a performance outcome. So I think we had a short webinar today. So I thank everyone for your time.
Bethany and Jennifer, you're on. Before we leave, can you provide an update of what next week's webinar will be?
Jennifer, you can jump in if anything, but next week's webinar is, so far, that'll be a technology roadmap to implementation and how Illinois WorkNet supports that roadmap. And Kitchens will be presenting an update similar to what she did for the IWP, maybe with some more updates.
All right.
Okay, if there's no other questions, have a good day. We'll see you or listen from you next week.